Hello my sea goats, Seabro here, and in this video we'll be looking at the basics of spam compositions. Okay, so spam compositions, sometimes known as poke comps, are compositions that dish out large amount of long range damage and can control long sightlines. For this reason, they usually have two shields. This lets them split up to control more of the map, or double up their shields to make their team pretty much invincible. Orisa is the usual go-to main tank for spam, unless she is nerfed into the Shadow Realm with some stupid dumbass patch notes that make her even less fun to play. Sigma is the usual off-tank, but Reinhardt can be played if you're expecting the enemy to be forced to bull you. Spam DPS heroes are generally the dumbass skillless heroes like Bastion, Hanzo, Echo, Junkrat and Pharah. A case can be made too for Ashe because her dynamite is insane and Widowmaker can get played too. Although she hardly has any damage at all, she can control sightlines really well completely by herself. If you are running an Orisa, then heroes like Echo and Ashe that can follow up on halts are really valuable. Similarly, switching out a DPS for a Tracer and engaging on halts can make it a very difficult composition to beat. For healers, Baptiste is the usual go-to flex healer because he can dish out a large amount of damage. Also, his immortality field is really useful if you get dived? Is that right? Let me know in the comments. Zen and Mercy are really good picks for your other healer because they can increase the amount of damage that your team can do. And Brig is fairly good if you're expecting the enemy team to get on top of you. One thing to bear in mind with healers is to make sure that your healing duo have the ability to heal both your tanks and your DPS. For example, if you're running a Baptiste Mercy with a Tracer, then your Tracer won't get as much support as you would if you were playing a Zen or a Brig. Okay, so I mentioned in episode 1 of this series that spam compositions are all about map control. But what does this mean? Well, at any time in the game, both teams control a certain area of the map. And if the enemy team moves through an area of the map that you control, then they have to commit resources to maintain or move through that area. Let's look at an example. This is a game between NYXL and Spark. We are on second point Junkertown and Spark are defending. They have a choice of where to set up and they choose what areas of the map they want to control. Their Sigma takes this angle through this window. This gives him soft control over these sightlines. Orisa is set up on the high ground here, so has both this sightline and this sightline on the cart completely covered. The Ashe is set up here mainly to scout if they're pushing up the stairs, but also to give her control of these sightlines. So Spark has taken the opportunity to set up, taking as much of the map for themselves as possible. Now let's look at how NYXL try to move through the map. They start off by moving through pretty much the only area of the map that Spark doesn't have sightlines over. Because they have now moved up, Bernard on Sigma positions back with the Orisa because his old position doesn't give him much beneficial map control anymore. Yak, Pung and Floor on Ball and Tracer pressure cart. This is too much for Spark's Tracer to deal with alone, so Spark's backline move towards the cart. The NYXL then uses time to push forward and suddenly Spark's majority spam based composition is split and all focusing on different enemies. In this play, Spark take a lot of the map control they set up initially, taking all sorts of sightlines, but NYXL avoid these sightlines and try to surround them. I'll say it again, spam compositions are all about sightlines and map control. Fighting against spam is all about bypassing those sightlines and splitting the enemy's attention. If you as a defending spam based composition can control all the sightlines, then the enemy team is going to have to commit a lot of resources to even try to engage you. I want to quickly change the subject to shields. As I said earlier, usually with pure spam based compositions you have two shields. This helps you break the enemy's shields before they break yours, but it also helps you play split. Often teams struggle with when to play split and when to play together. Sadly, there are a lot of factors that affect this and it can be quite complicated, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. In general, playing split is better. You gain more of the map control, it's easier to punish the enemy mid-rotations, and the enemy will find it harder to engage you. In general, your default setup will be the core of your team, usually at least your Orisa and Baptiste, will be in a position to contest the objective, and will be the team that's ready to take the engagement. If the enemy jump or run onto them, then they have Orisa Fortify and Immortality Field so they can sustain themselves for a very long time. Meanwhile, your Sigma, your other healer, and at least one DPS play at an angle as a good angle to attack the enemy if they engage your core. And method depending, you might have a Trace or Echo or Mobile character playing alone somewhere, but in LOS of your healers, just to take even more map control. There are a few reasons you won't want to be playing split, however. Firstly, if the map you're playing on doesn't have multiple strong sightlines that you or the enemy can abuse. Let's have a look at an example. This is First Point Havana on defense, and you often hold this area here and spam into the enemies as they try to push cart. Some teams do opt to set up half their team here and the core of their team here, and that can be quite successful, but depending on what the enemy team is running, if your Sigma gets spammed out, the shield breaks, then they don't have an easy route of retreat back to the core of their team, so often the enemy will play together. In this case, there is no point in denying sightlines to the enemy because there's only one path that they really can approach from. Let's look at another example. This is First Point Rialto, and let's say that the enemy team is also running a spam based composition, then often the defending team will choose to hold here. And that again is because there isn't really any point to taking map control because you know very well that they're going to be pushing through here, so instead you can just focus all of your fire onto there. Similarly, First Point Paris and Last Point Kings Row are good examples. Another reason you might want to play together is if you have ultimates like Bongo or Amplification Matrix that your team can get more value out of if they play together. If you're running a Zen or Hanzo for example at an off angle with your Sigma, then sometimes it can be worth joining back together so that you can spam even more damage. Another bit more of an obvious reason is if someone on your team dies, you can no longer safely hold an off angle, or if you get pressured out by the enemy team. Sorry that this video is a bit longer than my previous one, but there are two more important things that I want to talk about quickly. Firstly, rotations. Spam-based compositions perform best on long sightlines, so it's really important that you try your absolute best to keep those long sightlines. If the enemy starts moving closer to you and you have the opportunity to back up and increase the distance, then take it. Often maps like First Point Kings Row or First Point Volskaya, you get this ring a roses dance thing going on where the enemy team tries to get close to you and you just keep backing up around point. Sometimes teams even run a Symmetra to teleport themselves to safety if the enemy team gets close. That's also a big advantage of using the high ground, because if you use the high ground, then it will take longer for the enemy team to approach you, so you have longer to rotate and back up to maintain those sightlines. And the last thing that I want to talk about is attacking with a spam-based composition. A lot of what I have talked about involves setting up and taking the map without having to fight for it, but if you are the attacking team, then you need to force out the enemy angles so you can gain that juicy map control. This often involves playing together so that you can pressure out the enemy and then slowly gain that map control until you get a pick. Often you will need to use ultimates like Amplification Matrix or Bongo to put enough pressure on the enemy before you can push up and take space. Anyways, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. This video is actually part of a series, so feel free to check out the rest of my videos on Macro Overwatch, where we look at different compositions and team related knowledge that can help you improve your team's understanding of this beautiful game. If you have any questions, as always, leave me a comment down below. See you next time, where we will talk about the basics of Dive.